Have you ever been judged by the color of your skin or the weight of your past? What if, in one moment, you could reclaim your dignity and inspire an entire community to do the same? This is the story of a man who showed us all how. The sun spilled gold over Rosewood Park that afternoon, dappling the sidewalks with warm light as leaves whispered in the breeze. Children raced through the grass with kites overhead, their laughter mingling with the soft gurgle of the central fountain. It was the kind of day that made the world feel slower, softer. And into that peaceful scene walked Mr. Harold James, steady, deliberate, with a cane in his right hand and a modest bag of birdseed in the other. At 76, his steps weren't quick, but everyone carried the grace of a man who had lived through storms and still chose peace. His silver beard matched his pressed flat cap, and his eyes, oh, his eyes held stories of battles fought overseas and at home, of dignity earned, not given. Each morning he came to this park, the same one he'd petitioned to have built 40 years ago, when the neighborhood kids had no place to play but cracked sidewalks. He'd stood in the city council chambers, wearing the same suit he wore to his daughter's graduation, demanding green space for black families long ignored. And he'd won. Today, like every other day, he shuffled to the stone bench near the old sycamore tree, tipped his cap to the joggers who recognized him, and opened his bird seed with the same care he once used to pack MREs in Vietnam. The birds knew him well: pigeons, sparrows, even the occasional brave squirrel, gathering like old friends as he tossed seed with a soft chuckle. A few kids paused their soccer game to wave. One little girl pointed and whispered to her mom, "That's the Birdman." But just as the peace of the moment settled in, a shadow fell across the walkway. A white patrol car crept along the curb, too slow to be casual. The engine cut. A door opened. A young officer stepped out. Sunglasses mirrored the sky. His boots crunched against the gravel as he approached. Mr. James looked up with a welcoming smile, one he'd given strangers for decades. But the officer didn't smile back. Instead, his voice was firm, cold. "Sir, I'm going to need you to leave the park." The birds scattered, the children stopped, and just like that, the sun didn't feel so warm anymore. Mr. James blinked, the corners of his eyes tightening just slightly, not from fear but confusion. He leaned gently on his cane and adjusted his cap, as if the extra second would bring clarity. "Excuse me?" he asked, voice calm as still water. The officer's stance grew firmer. Hands on his belt, posture widened. "You match a suspicious description," he said, eyes scanning Mr. James as if his cardigan and loafers somehow posed a threat. From the nearby playground, a mother paused mid-push on her toddler's swing. A man tossing a frisbee stopped mid-throw. Slowly, heads began to turn toward the unfolding scene. Mr. James raised a brow. "Suspicious?" he repeated, almost chuckling. "Son, I've been feeding birds here longer than you've had a badge." The officer wasn't moved. "Park's not for loitering. We've had complaints. You'll need to leave." There it was, that word, loitering, the same one that had been used in the 60s to chase him off lunch counters, the same word that hung like a ghost in neighborhoods like his, where just being was sometimes seen as a crime. He sighed, long and low. "I'm not loitering, I'm living." Still, the officer's hand hovered near his radio. "I won't ask again." Mr. James stood taller, straighter, like he did in formation all those years ago. "You don't need to ask again, but maybe you need to ask why I'm here." The officer blinked, his confidence wavering for the first time. A young mom nearby whispered, "That man's harmless. He's here every day." But the officer didn't turn. His training had taught him control, command, but not always context, not history, not heart. And in that tense moment, something unspoken passed between them, the kind of silence that holds decades, the kind of silence that echoes louder than shouts. Mr. James, still calm, looked past the officer toward the fountain, the same one built in honor of veterans like him. He'd sat on that planning committee, signed every permit, watched it rise from dirt. Now a stranger was trying to erase him from it. Around them, the park watched, Not with fear, but with quiet disbelief. And the officer had no idea the next few seconds would change everything. The young officer shifted uncomfortably, sensing eyes on him. But pride? Pride can be louder than reason. "I need to clear the park," he said again, this time more forcefully, as if volume could cover ignorance. Mr. James didn't flinch. He simply looked at the man, steady and unshaken. "Young man," he said, voice graveled with time, "I've been coming here since long before you were born. I marched with Dr. King. I took shrapnel in Da Nang. I've bled for this country. And today I just wanted to feed the birds." The words hung heavy in the spring air, but the officer crossed his arms. "I'm not here to debate history. I'm enforcing the rules. You're either going to leave, or I'll have to escort you out." From a nearby bench, an elderly woman stood up slowly. "That's Harold James," she called out, incredulous. "You don't escort Harold James out of this park. This park is here because of Harold James." But the officer ignored her. He pointed toward the gate like a referee throwing a penalty. "Final warning." And in that moment, something shifted. Mr. James looked around at the park he'd helped bring to life, the sycamore trees he'd advocated to protect, the playground he'd once fundraised to build for children who looked like him. It had always been more than a park. It was a promise. And now that promise was being spit on by someone who hadn't even asked his name. With a sigh that seemed to carry a lifetime, Mr. James reached for the bench beside him, not to pack up, not to surrender, but to pick up his small American flag, the one he carried on Veterans Day, the one his late wife had stitched his initials into. He held it in his hand, letting it wave softly in the breeze. "I've been told to leave places my whole life," he murmured, eyes not angry but profoundly tired. "But never a park I helped build." The wind quieted. Even the birds seemed to understand something sacred had just been threatened. And just then, the crunch of new footsteps on gravel. From behind them, faster, more urgent. A voice rang out, deep, familiar. "Harold, that you?" Everyone turned, and the story had only just begun. "Harold, that you?" The voice cut through the tension like a blade of light. From the park's jogging trail came a tall man in navy blue athletic gear, sweat glistening on his brow. He moved with purpose, sneakers crunching against the gravel, eyes wide with disbelief. It was Mayor Antonio Reyes, the city's youngest elected mayor, known for his community ties and grassroots campaigns. But more importantly, he was a former student of Mr. James. Harold turned slightly, squinting through the sun. "Antonio?" The mayor jogged up, heart pounding, not from the run, but from what he was witnessing. "What's going on here?" Reyes asked, glancing at the officer. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried weight, authority wrapped in disbelief. The officer straightened, clearly surprised. This man was, refusing to comply with park regulations. He was loitering. The word hung in the air like smoke. Reyes's jaw clenched. He looked from the officer to Harold, then back again. "You're telling me you asked Harold James to leave this park?" The officer hesitated. "Yes, sir. I didn't know who he was." Reyes exhaled sharply, the disbelief now turning to something colder. "That's the problem. You didn't ask. You didn't care to know." The crowd had thickened now, joggers, parents, teens with earbuds out, standing in reverent silence. "This man," Reyes said, gesturing to Harold, "taught me history when the textbooks didn't. He taught half this city what it means to serve with honor." Mr. James stayed quiet, letting the moment speak for him. He stood with his cane, flag still in hand, the wind gently tugging at the corner of his coat. Reyes turned to the officer, his voice now edged with steel. "This park exists because of Mr. James. The benches, the fountain, even the Veterans Memorial, it's here because of him. And you tried to push him out like he was nothing." The officer said nothing. His radio crackled on his shoulder, but he didn't reach for it. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted. The uniform no longer carried the authority in the space. Respect did. Legacy did. Reyes stepped beside Harold and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. You never should have been approached like this." Harold smiled faintly, eyes kind as ever. I've seen worse, he said, but I'm glad the right people are watching now. And oh, were they watching. The silence that followed was thick, like the entire park had stopped breathing. The officer shifted, suddenly aware of the weight of his badge, and the eyes now locked on him. He looked at Mr. James differently now, as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a loiterer, but as a monument of flesh and memory. Mayor Reyes turned, voice firm but steady. Let me explain something, he said, loud enough for all to hear. This man is Lieutenant Harold James, Bronze Star recipient, Vietnam veteran, civil rights activist. He's the reason this park was even built, after a decade-long fight with City Hall. A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. The officer's mouth parted, but no words came out. Reyes continued, his tone filled with pride. When this community had nothing, Harold James helped raise funds, gather signatures, and fight red tape to make sure our kids had a place to run free. He motioned to the fountain nearby. You see that? It's dedicated to fallen veterans. He designed the inscription. To those who served and those still serving. People began to murmur, recognizing the name etched in bronze at the base of the fountain. H. James. Now the officer looked stricken. I didn't know, he muttered. Mr. James gave a soft chuckle, eyes twinkling. You didn't ask. Reyes turned back to the officer. This is why knowing your community matters. Not just scanning faces, but learning names, legacies, people. The officer swallowed hard. I was doing my job. No, the mayor replied. You were exercising power without understanding, and that is the opposite of service. The officer lowered his head. For a long moment, the crowd said nothing, but their silence wasn't passive. It was active, heavy with reflection, and then a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, Is he a hero? His mother nodded. Yes, baby, he's our hero. The boy walked over timidly, holding out a dandelion. Mr. James bent down, slowly, carefully, and took it with reverence. Thank you, young man, he said. The officer watched it all, the regret now carved deep into his face. The man he'd tried to remove had just taught him the meaning of presence, without raising his voice or lifting a finger. The officer stood motionless, the moment pressing down on him like gravity. The crowd hadn't turned angry, but that made it worse. Their silence was not condemnation. It was disappointment, and sometimes disappointment lingers longer than outrage. Mayor Reyes turned to Mr. James, voice gentler now. Would you mind sharing a few words? Harold hesitated, then gave a soft nod. He straightened his shoulders, still tall despite the years, and stepped forward, cane tapping lightly against the pavement. The children gathered near the bench. A few teens pulled out their phones, not for clout, but to record something real. He took a deep breath and began. I was born in a country that didn't see me as equal. I wore a uniform that matched my brothers in arms, but back home, I couldn't drink from the same fountain as them. A hush fell deeper over the crowd. I've been questioned, pushed, and told to leave places that were never meant for people who looked like me. But I never left in bitterness. I stayed. I built. I fought so no one else would feel that way again. He paused, looking right at the officer, not in anger, but in invitation. But progress doesn't just happen in courtrooms or elections. It happens here, in our parks, on our sidewalks, in our day-to-day choices. It happens when you look someone in the eye and see them. The officer's throat tightened. He took a breath. I'm sorry, sir, he said quietly. I made assumptions. That's on me. Mr. James nodded. Apology accepted. But now, what will you do next? That question floated through the air, unanswered, yet thunderously important. Mayor Reyes stepped in, eyes thoughtful. I think it's time we start telling our stories right, honoring them while the people who made them are still here. He turned to Mr. James. Next week, we're holding a community celebration here in the park. I want you to be our guest of honor, and I want to unveil something that's long overdue. Mr. James raised a brow. Unveil what? Reyes smiled. You'll see. The officer stepped forward again. Sir, may I escort you to your bench? Mr. James gave a soft laugh. Well, I suppose I'll allow it. And with that, the man once ordered to leave was now being walked back with honor. A week passed, and when the sun rose that Saturday morning, the park looked different. Not because the trees had changed or the benches had been moved, but because the people had returned with purpose. Balloons swayed gently in the breeze. Fold-out chairs lined the lawn. A podium stood at the edge of the fountain, draped in a velvet cloth. Children chased bubbles. Elders arrived in church hats and polished shoes. Folks came early, not out of obligation, but reverence. At the heart of it all sat Mr. Harold James, dressed in his finest gray suit and polished shoes that hadn't touched the pavement since his granddaughter's graduation. Mayor Reyes stepped to the mic, his voice steady, his eyes shining. Today, he began, we're not just celebrating a park, we're celebrating the soul behind it, the man who gave this community its heart when the city forgot we had one. Applause erupted. Reyes nodded toward the cloth-covered monument behind him. We all know what Mr. James has done, but today we make sure the generations after us will know too. He turned to Mr. James. Sir, with your permission? Mr. James gave a quiet nod, his eyes misting. The mayor pulled back the cloth. Beneath it stood a new bronze statue, modest, graceful. It showed Mr. James seated on a bench, one hand resting on his cane, the other extended, offering crumbs to a bronze pigeon at his feet. The plaque beneath read, Harold James, soldier, teacher, builder of peace. Gasps filled the air, then cheers, then tears. The real Harold James looked at the sculpture, lips parted in awe. Well, he whispered. Children ran up to touch the base. Parents pointed, telling the story already. That's him. Right there. He built all this. From the back of the crowd, the young officer stood silently, arms at his sides. He didn't try to force his way forward, but Harold saw him. With a small gesture, he waved the young man forward, inviting him into the moment. The officer approached slowly, humbled. Sir, I don't have the right words. Mr. James looked at him, then at the statue, then back again. Start with this, he said, smiling. Tell someone what happened, and make sure it never happens again. And that was how healing begins. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long golden rays over the park, families lingered. Laughter echoed near the swings. Elders swapped stories beneath the sycamores. A saxophone player down by the fountain played A Change Is Gonna Come. And there, sitting at his usual bench, was Mr. Harold James. Same spot, same cane, same soft bag of breadcrumbs. But this time, he wasn't alone. Children gathered around his feet, waiting patiently for his stories between handfuls of popcorn. Teenagers sat nearby, listening with curiosity, not rebellion. The young officer stood just a few feet away, not in duty but in learning. And beside Mr. James, sitting on that bench like he had every right to be there, was Mayor Reyes. Never thought I'd see a statue of myself in a public park, Mr. James said, smiling. Reyes chuckled. It's only fair. You built the soul of this place. Mr. James tossed another crumb, watching the birds flutter in delight. You know, I used to come here to find peace, he said quietly. Now it seems peace found me. He leaned back, eyes scanning the horizon. I've always believed legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about who remembers your name and why. Reyes nodded. They'll remember, Mr. James. We'll make sure of it. A little girl tugged on Harold's sleeve. Mister, she asked, were you really a soldier? He smiled. Yes, I was. Did you fight bad guys? He looked out over the park, the fountain, the children, the officer now laughing with a father nearby. Yes, sweetheart, he said. And sometimes, the bad guy isn't a monster. Sometimes it's just a moment of misunderstanding. But when we choose kindness, when we choose to stay and teach, that's how we win. She smiled, then gave him a drawing, a crayon picture of him feeding birds next to his statue. He held it like it was gold. The sun dipped lower, the wind calmed, and in that quiet, sacred space, one truth stood taller than bronze. Respect doesn't come from a badge or a podium. It comes from how you treat people when no one's watching and how you rise when everyone is. Mr. James didn't just reclaim his park. He reminded a city what dignity looks like. In the end, Harold James didn't just fight for a park. He fought for the dignity of every person who'd ever been overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. And in doing so, he reminded us all that true power isn't in the ability to command, but in the courage to stand with honor, no matter the odds. His legacy isn't just carved in bronze, it's carried in the hearts of those who choose respect over assumption, love over division. Harold James didn't just change a park, he changed the way we see each other. And that is the real victory.